Hey guys, so I feel like admitting something. Anybody who's paying attention knows the last episode was super short. It didn't feel that way to me. Like, I know that sounds weird, but I had most of a page of notes and it turned out to be like 14 minutes. Either I'm getting super efficient about this, or I just don't have a lot to say about Season 5. I don't know. You guys can take whatever you want from this. So, before we get into this, I just want to say this is, for those of you not aware, pretty much the last Bester we'll see. I mean, there's been some stuff that has been after this, but effectively this is the end of Walter Koenig's run on the show. Which is funny, because it doesn't really feel like a conclusion in any way, shape, or form, does it? But, you know, whatever. I've already talked about that. See you around, Walter Koenig. I will always remember you more as Bester than I will as Chekhov. And I actually saw Moontrap, so I don't want to remember that one. Anyways, we haven't actually sat and talked a lot about Psi Corps and the nature of telepaths in this setting. Not really. I mean, it's come up here and there, and it's been an undercurrent since Season 1, but it hasn't ever actually really been discussed. This is probably our last real chance to do so. But the thing is, I'm not sure there's anything really new to discuss. There are a few things I do want to talk about. Obviously, Psi Corps is portrayed as something horrific. You remember that ad, right? The commercial they showed? I don't remember which episode it was, but it was way back. Where we basically just get to see a Psi Corps commercial, and it was really messed up. This is actually a Lower Decks episode. Typical episode, different perspective. We're seeing this episode from Bester's perspective, and the perspective of the Psi Corps in general. We see people on a first-name basis with Bester, calling him Al. We see people who look up to him, who idolize him, or consider him a hero. We see people who want to impress him. Now, it's worth noting, Bester himself doesn't really act all that different, except when he's back at the Psi Corps headquarters, where he is personable, he's relatable, he comes across as kind of like your grandfather who was in the military. Which, fun fact, we may be officially reaching the last point in history where people can say that, with the connotations I mean it with. And not that people aren't in the military anymore, but I mean, you know, I currently have only one living grandfather left who served in World War II, just to name one example of what I'm talking about here. Anyways. So, you know, you get across that kind of impression. He's not, like, super warm and super comforting, but he is still, nevertheless, a kindly figure with a bit of a stern edge to him. We see the logic behind which him behaving that way makes so much sense in hindsight. Now, I've been saying this whole time that Bester is a true believer in the cause, that he cares about the plight of telepaths, and that is hammered in over and over and over throughout the course of this episode. But seeing it on display, seeing how much he cares about bringing these people in. There's this great scene where he has been injured in a firefight, and he says, don't hurt him. Just don't hurt him. He just keeps repeating that. I love that scene because it really helps to emphasize, like the previous Byron encounter, how much Bester... It's probably the only thing really keeping Bester going, but I'll talk more about that later. I love the idea of Psi Corps headquarters, the training facility for the Psi Cops, kind of coming across like, I know this is going to sound weird, Hogwarts, or Xavier's Xavier's School for Gifted Students, you know. It has that overall atmosphere to it. Not as well fleshed out as it could be, but nevertheless, that's the impression I got through the whole thing. I like that idea. Whatever the evils of the Psi Corps, I like the idea that internally they promote the concept that you, for being here, are significant. You are worthwhile. You are someone we actually want to put time and effort and resources into. This is pure speculation, but I've always had the impression that Psi Corps basically sabotages the economy and resources of the mundanes in order to funnel resources into the elite. It's a very old concept, you know, the rich sitting on the backs of the poor is the most common presentation of that concept in human history. But in this case, it's slightly different because this is actually a kind of a complicated economic model. All I'm going to say is that if you funnel a lot of money into a small amount of people without a lot of real return into the economy, you're effectively hurting the overall economic balance of whatever system you're connecting to. In this case, probably a global economy at the least. But you can get away with that if you don't care about the global economy. You can get away with that if you don't mind doing damage to the rest of that, because that's not what you care about. This is what you care about. You see where I'm going with this? The idea that they are actively, I guess siphoning is the best word I could use, the resources of the mundanes in order to lavish them upon the elite. What is it Bester says? You are special. Now, before I go into that you are special thing, though, I love the idea of how they do the training and why they do the training. I am again reminded of Xavier's School of Gifted Students. The idea that this is a muscle. You need to train this muscle. And for those of you who don't really understand what I mean by that, how many of you have been around very small children, like 1, 2, 3-year-olds? One of the things that I found most fascinating was they have trouble doing this. Now, to just about anyone watching this, probably everyone watching this, this is a joke. You don't even have to think about this. You probably don't have... It's probably not even a thing in your brain to think to yourself, I'm going to pick up the pen. That is such a base level impulse that there's not even a thought there. It's just, boop, done. But for a child who's still learning the muscles, learning how to grab it, learning how to really grip it, and they grip it really tight because they're still figuring that out. That's what I mean by the this is a muscle parallel. And I've always loved the idea of learning how to properly use, how to be more precise with powers, whether it comes to superhero comics or, you know, magical abilities or psionic abilities or whatever. I've always liked that concept. That it too often, in my opinion, fiction has done a thing where one of those categories of things, it's like, oh, you have this superpower, and you pretty much immediately know how to use it. Or after a short montage, you know how to use it, rather than spending years of training and dedication to really be able to use it properly, which is what the Psychops do. The idea of mentally and emotionally and even physically preparing them for the assaults that could and probably will be done to them. Being able to withstand, 45 minutes, I think he mentioned specifically, of constant psychic assault. Think about that for a moment. I love that because it makes so much sense, and it's another wonderful bit of setting building. And it would be a wonderful build-up to the telepath war. Well, I'll stop that sentence there. I also like the idea of rehabilitation. They show this little short film about, hi, I used to be a runner, blah, blah, blah. This is still more of that whole believes in the cause thing, but I get the very strong impression that it's predominantly the mentality throughout most of Psi Corps. And I'll talk more about why later. I'm going to build up to that point. All I want to say right now is that the idea that the Psi Corps as a whole actively wants to rehabilitate people, not just for evil purposes, but also for evil purposes, makes a lot of sense to me. The idea that we really want to make sure these people come back into the fold. That's one of the undercurrent themes of this work, actually. Keeping everything in-house, in the family. Now, what's funny is that is a military perspective. I know that sounds weird, but it is. If you are fighting your enemy, one of the most valuable, most amazing possible things you could have is a fly buzzing around your room. Come on, really? Sorry. I don't like flies. One of the most, probably buzzed in from outside. Occasionally the dog leaves the door open. One of the most valuable things you could have is to have the assets A, B, and C, and for the enemy to not know what you have. The obfuscation of your strengths is probably, I cannot overestimate the value of that from a purely tactical perspective. That is one of the greatest strengths of proper military strategy. It's one of the reasons why spies and messengers and scouts have always been so incredibly important throughout more or less all of human history when it comes to warfare. So, keeping all of this in-house makes a lot of sense for Psi Corps. They've got that ship. Actually, they have ships. They mention the ship, but that they infer that there are other ships just hanging out in hyperspace. Hidden, waiting, coming out only for resupply, just to make sure nobody knows they have that. They try to keep everything as far as who is capable of what in-house. Oh, no, we couldn't possibly make this mistake. Oh, this isn't an issue, blah, blah, blah. There's that great scene where we see Bester talking to Franklin, and Franklin's just telling them the facts. I mean, he doesn't like Bester, but he's not interested in the politics of this or anything like that. And then Bester leaves and immediately drops the act and is like, okay, this is a really big situation. We got to deal with this right now. But he doesn't want anyone else to know that. We need to make sure that everyone thinks we're unified, too. The telepaths must be unified. If we're not, the enemy could use that against us. And remember, they reference twice in this episode a coming telepath war. When it comes to the mundanes versus us, there will be no contest. So they are prepping for war. That is the whole purpose of this strategy. It's interesting, isn't it? I also want to say one other thing. During the rehabilitation film, he mentions the suicide rate of telepaths who have gone rogue is through the roof. Now that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't actually think that's a made-up statistic. There aren't a lot of parallels in real life because real life is mundane and boring, but I want you to imagine just for a moment that you suddenly gain a superpower. Let me give you a direct example that I bet a lot of my audience knows about. Let's say you have the ability to use magic. But simply by being a mage, even if you don't practice it, carries with it the risk of possession by a spirit from the Fade. So, your very existence is now a constant threat, and vigilance and discipline are your tools. But you don't like that, so you run away. Now you're a threat while emotionally unstable, while not having support. And on top of that, you have superpowers, basically. You are no longer a mundane. And now you can actually do stuff. Isn't it logical under those circumstances that you would have more of an inclination to end it than not? I mean, I know everyone says all sorts of things about human need for survival and blah, blah, blah. But under such severe duress... And what I just gave was the Dragon Age example. In this example, you can read minds. Tell me that wouldn't be depressing. So, it's a nice little bit of joy being added in there. I mentioned the line, being a telepath makes you special. We learn that Bester has effectively been raised by the Corps. The Corps is mother, the Corps is father. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Obviously, there's the family thing, and there's the sides thing. You get the impression that the Corps was a natural byproduct of the need to ensure not telepath supremacy, but telepath survival. The idea that the only way that the mundanes, who outnumber us like 1,000,000,000 to 1, are ever going to leave us alone is if we step in line. We'll make a nice, neat organization according to their rules and their laws. We'll attach ourselves to their government, their bureaucracy. We will be a part of the system rather than outside of it, and we will be regulated within the system. And then we will spend 4 seasons of Babylon 5 slowly taking control bit by bit, because of course we don't want to stay this way. We only did this as a necessary evil. It's another reason I mentioned that whole more or less deliberately sabotaging the economy of the world thing. Although that is of course pure conjecture. But I want to also bring back to that point, being a telepath means you're special. I don't know how to vocalize this. I can feel it. And I'm curious how many of you know what I'm talking about. The idea that I am special. I have these amazing powers, and I am special. I have to be special. There has to be an explanation for why I am different. There has to be something that helps to explain why this is this way. Why am I such an outsider? Why do these other people look down on me? Why do I have to deal with these voices in my head? Why? There needs to be an answer for the individual, and I feel like Bester has clung to that, that is his lifeline, that is what makes Bester keep going, is the idea that he is special. Damn it. Every telepath is special. Damn it. Because if we're not, then what was the point of any of it? What's the point of the suffering? What's the point of the persecution? What's the point of all the things that he's gone through? He has done some unpleasant things. At the very end of this episode, the lady, whose name I can't remember, kills a mundane. Just straight up ejects him out the airlock. And I'll talk more about that moment when we get there. Bester pretty much flat out says, "Are you sure? You sure you want to be the one?" And when she does, he says, "Okay, maybe you might be psychop material after all." Because he has had to do many things that he probably found distasteful at some point or another in his life, and he may still find distasteful. What's the point of it all if I'm not special? Quick note, real quick. I do like how gently he lets her down when she comes on to him, and how much he quickly smooths things over and eases her afterwards. It's actually very gentle and very, well, familial, really. It's like, yeah, it's cool. Nothing happened. We're all right. You have a good night. It's a nice little touch. And then, of course, the other guy comes in and says, "By the way, we're going to Babylon 5. Look at Bester's face. I love Walter Koenig's expression when he learns that he's going to Babylon 5, because it's just, the first thing is just, ugh. Okay. God damn it. We learn about a concept in this called a mind shredder. They don't go into a lot of detail on it, but they don't really have to. We pretty much know, based on seeing, what a mind shredder is. It's kind of a horrifying thought, isn't it? I find it especially interesting because, from what I understand of the material, it's really hard to defend against a mind shredder who is doing a deliberate mind shredding attack. So, that's fun to think about. Real quick, I do like how the kid shows such ambition. It's like, I'm going to go in there and we're going to get credit and it'll be cool and I'm taking initiative, that's all. I mention that because it again reminds me of the Xavier School and the Harry Potter example. See, the interesting thing about both of those pieces in fiction is that, with very few exceptions, most of the time the people in charge don't really emphasize that, by the way, this stuff is real. Like, they're still acting like kids, effectively, or young teenagers or young adults, depending on. And so they come across as, yeah, we're just going to do the normal things that normal kids or teenagers or young adults do. In other words, foolish things. But the consequences when people with superpowers do that is a lot worse. And we do kind of see that in this episode. By the way, quick side, I love how the guy is actually really smart in how he's continuing to maneuver through this. The murderer, I can't actually think of his name. The rogue telepath. He comes up, grabs the gambling skill, gets really good at it, takes the money, kills the guy, immediately leaves the area, partners up with someone else to help cover his back. He does a lot of things that line up very well with being a very intelligent escapee, which is funny because apparently he doesn't even remember why he's escaping. And of course we see Bester as being pretty smart too. We see a lot of Bester as the detective in this episode. It has been commented before by one of my viewers as well, actually, that Bester and Garibaldi both have a lot of the detective mindset. They can look at the evidence and very quickly deduce how it connects to itself and be like, aha! And he does that consistently throughout this work. And he does a very good job of it. And I just wanted to comment on that because it's a nice little side touch. I love this episode. Every time I say that, something bad's coming. I love this episode, but there's one scene that actually makes me groan. Just like, really? There's a scene where he's like, this papers are written in different handwriting. Then he looks at the screen, And he already knows several other facts, like the fact that he's supposed to be a P10, not a P12, and yet he has demonstrated P12 powers. And then he looks at the thing that says, you upset him. Then they repeat it 3 times, and then Bester explains it out loud, as if you were a drooling moron and didn't pick up on it already. That irritates me. Like Bester being like, of course, and then rushing forward, that would make a little bit more sense. Having it, that whole scene just dragged on. And every time I see that scene, I'm just like, okay, whatever. So they get the guy. Everything's good. Woo! One of the nice bits, it's a subtle bit, throughout the entire series, Bester has consistently referred to telepaths as my people and mundanes as your people, your kind. He has a discussion with Dr. Franklin, and Dr. Franklin's like, got to help you. And Bester cynically points out that, yeah, you wish you hadn't now. That was pure instinct, wasn't it? Franklin says, no. No, you seem to have this perspective that the only possible thing that could happen is that there's a dividing line between your people and my people. But you're wrong, and I'll prove it. I'll let you scan me. I'll authorize it. Bester doesn't scan him. He doesn't need to, because he believes him. And he calls him an optimist, and then refers to him as your kind. Not your kind as in a mundane. And it's a nice little touch. In that wonderful little interaction, we see just how cynical and jaded and bitter Bester has become over the years. It's a wonderful little cherry topping on top of the sundae that is, or whatever your preferred dessert is, that is Bester's character. See, here's the thing, and I said I'd build up to this point. Life is easier with lines. If you have to walk through life and look at someone and judge that person on their individual merits and their individual basis and how they react and how they talk, and then you have to, that's not a big deal, right? Now you have to do that with 50 people every day, 100 every day. Everyone you're interacting with, you have to think about it. And you know what? That's a lot of work and effort. And by God, it'd be easy if we had some kind of dividing line so I could just say, everyone on this side of the line is cool, everyone on that side of the line is not. Life is easier with lines. And I'm not going to get into my own preaching here. I could. I have strong feelings about this matter. But there is no denying that a lot of people actively seek lines in their life. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I mean dividing lines. One of the most common ones we have in real life is national lines. You're from this other nationality. You're from this other organization. You're from this other group. This other cultural subsect. And I can therefore say that by virtue of you being part of that sect, you're one of the enemy. QED. Nice and simple. But you see someone on your side, and you look up at them, and you're like, we cool? The other person's like, yeah, we're cool. You don't have to think about it. Do you? And so we see the appeal of the lines in this episode, because the girl, the lady, has clearly bought into that concept. It is us versus them. That's why she is the one who chooses to go ahead and eject the mundane. It doesn't matter that he basically did nothing wrong other than... well, that's not true. That's not true. He did stab the guy. I actually forgot about that. Okay, so he is a murderer. But she didn't eject him because he's a murderer. She ejected him because he hurt the Corps. Because he hurt one of them. Someone on the other side of the line hurt someone on this side of the line. It's a chilling moment, really. And we see how Bester pretty firmly believes in that dividing line. After all, we're special. And you're not. I'm actually sad that we're not going to be seeing Bester again for the rest of the show. We're really starting to wind down. It doesn't feel like it, does it? It doesn't feel like we're getting into the end, but we now have less than 10 episodes, I believe, as of now, before we get to the end. I hope you'll join me for the rest of this. By the way, as a heads up, I'm probably going to toss out the option before now, but just to make sure that everyone's aware of this, I'm going to be doing another poll for everyone's favorite and least favorite Babylon 5 episodes. So anybody who wants to weigh in on that is, of course, going to be more than welcome to. Please don't do that here. I will be doing a separate video to make it nice and easy to keep track of, just like I did with Voyager. But I do intend to do some kind of finale thing with Babylon 5, like I did with Voyager. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.